Kelly sat at the edge of the bed, the coolness of the night air pressing against her skin through the thin curtains. The city outside buzzed with life, but inside, the silence was deafening. She glanced at the clock, 1:27 a.m. Simon wasn't home yet, and he hadn't bothered to text or call. The sinking feeling in her chest tightened. A familiar companion in the long, lonely nights she had become accustomed to. Simon, once her everything, now felt like a stranger. It wasn't always like this. When they first met, he was charming, attentive, and so full of life. Kelly remembered their whirlwind romance, the nights spent laughing until their stomachs hurt, the promises of forever whispered in the dark. But those days seemed like a distant memory, replaced by cold indifference and a growing sense of dread. It had started subtly missed dinners, vague excuses, and an unfamiliar perfume clinging to his clothes. Kelly had tried to ignore the signs, telling herself she was being paranoid, but deep down, she knew. Simon was slipping away from her, lost in a world she was no longer a part of. The first time she confronted him, he brushed it off with a laugh. "You're imagining things, Kelly. Work has just been stressful." But she knew better. The late nights, the sudden interest in his appearance, and the way his phone was always glued to his hand, the screen quickly turned away whenever she was near. He was hiding something, and it was tearing her apart. One evening, Kelly's suspicions were confirmed. Simon had told her he was going out with friends, casual night out, nothing more. But as she sat alone in their apartment, her mind wouldn't rest. Something gnawed at her, urging her to check. She hesitated, hating herself for the mistrust, but her hands moved on their own, dialing the number of one of Simon's closest friends. "Hey, is Simon with you?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. A pause. No, Kelly, I haven't seen him tonight." The world seemed to tilt, her worst fears coming to life. She hung up, her heart pounding. Hours later, Simon stumbled in, the faint scent of someone else's perfume lingering on his clothes. Kelly confronted him, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know you weren't with your friends." Simon's reaction was explosive. "Pack your bags and go back to your parents," he shouted, his face twisted in anger. "You have no right to ask me where I am or who I'm meeting with." Kelly recoiled as if struck. The words cut deeper than any knife, leaving her gasping for air. She had always been the one to make sacrifices, to go above and beyond for him. She managed the house, worked her jobs, paid her own bills, and cared for his children from his previous marriage as if they were her own. She loved them, nurtured them, and never once asked for anything in return. But now, it felt like her entire world was crumbling, and she was powerless to stop it. The days that followed were a blur of numbness and pain. Simon withdrew even further, barely acknowledging her presence unless he wanted something. And when he did speak, it was to demand or criticize. Yet, despite the heartbreak, Kelly found herself trying even harder to win him back. She cooked his favorite meals, cleaned the house until it sparkled, and gave in to his every desire in the bedroom, hoping against hope that he would see her, love her again. But Simon remained distant, his heart seemingly locked away from her. She saw the messages on his phone, the flirtatious exchanges with women whose names she didn't recognize. She knew he was meeting them, spending time with them in ways he no longer did with her. Yet, she couldn't bring herself to leave. The thought of walking away from the life they had built, the children she had grown to love, was too much to bear. One evening, as Kelly folded Simon's clothes, she found a note tucked into the pocket of his jacket. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it, the neat handwriting jumping off the page. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait to see you again." Kelly's world shattered. The pieces of her broken heart seemed to scatter across the floor, each one cutting deeper into her soul. She sank to the ground, the note clutched in her hand, sobs racking her body. How had it come to this? What had she done to deserve this betrayal? But as the tears flowed, something inside her began to shift. A quiet resolve took root, growing stronger with each passing moment. She couldn't keep living like this, constantly fighting for scraps of affection from a man who no longer cared. Simon had made his choice, and it was time for her to make hers. That night, as Simon slept beside her, Kelly made a decision. She would confront him one last time, but not as the broken woman he had tried to reduce her to. She would do it as the strong, capable person she had forgotten she was. The next morning, Kelly stood in the kitchen, her hands steady as she prepared Simon's coffee. He sauntered in, barely glancing at her as he checked his phone. She watched him, the man she had once loved more than anything, and felt nothing but a deep, aching sadness. "Simon, we need to talk," she said, her voice calm. He looked up, annoyance flickering in his eyes. "What now?" "I found this." She placed the note on the table, watching his reaction carefully. Simon's face paled, but he quickly recovered, a sneer curling his lips. "So what? What are you going to do about it?" Kelly took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I'm done, Simon. I'm done trying to fix something you've already given up on. I've given you everything, and all you've done is take. But no more. I deserve better than this." For the first time in months, Simon looked uncertain. "You're leaving?" Kelly nodded, a small, sad smile on her lips. "Yes, I am. I'm going back to my parents, just like you told me to. But this time, it's my choice. I won't let you keep hurting me." Simon opened his mouth to say something, but Kelly held up her hand. "Don't. There's nothing left to say." She turned and walked away, her heart heavy but resolute. She packed her bags, carefully folding the life she had known into neat little piles. As she placed the last item in her suitcase, she paused, looking around the room one final time. This had been her home, her sanctuary, but now it was just a place filled with memories of pain and betrayal. With a deep breath, Kelly zipped up her suitcase and walked out the door, not looking back. The future was uncertain, and the road ahead would be difficult, but she knew she would find her way. She had to for herself, for the person she had once been, and for the person she was becoming. As she stepped out into the sunlight, the weight on her chest began to lift. For the first time in a long time, Kelly felt a glimmer of hope. She was free, and she would heal. One day, she would look back on this chapter of her life and see it for what it was: a lesson in strength, in knowing her worth, and in never settling for less than she deserved. And with that, Kelly walked forward into her new life, leaving the shattered reflections of her past behind.